Okay, Mr. Woodard has introduced us to the differences between prejudice and discrimination, talked about some in-group and out-group bias. So let's start looking at what causes prejudice. And one of the first things that causes prejudice, or can be a cause of prejudice, is, again, one of the terms that Mr. Woodard was talking about, that idea of social distance, that we have if we can perceive some dissimilarity, some difference between ourselves and another individual or another group, then it's easy to think that there's a distance between us. Of course, Mr. Woodard was talking about skin color and the armbands in Nazi Germany. Economic competition. This one's been going on in the United States for a long time, not just in our current world, but it continues in our current world. We hear oftentimes the blaming of immigrants for, quote, taking our jobs. Problem is, studies have shown that that's not really true, and it's been going on since the history of our country, and we've had immigrants coming over. It was really high profile at the beginning, or the turn, I should say, of the 20th century. Had a lot of Irish immigrants coming over. You can see historical signage that says the Irish need not apply. There was this belief that these immigrants were taking our jobs and causing this economic competition. Scapegoating. That term actually comes from the ancient world, where they would literally take a goat and then symbolically foist the sins of the community on that goat and then send the goat out into the desert to die. So it was taking the sins of the community out to die. And that's what scapegoating is in our world, as far as you take our anger and we're going to place it on something else to let it kind of carry our anger or our ineptitudes with it. So Nazi Germany, again, a good example. Nazi Germany had a lot of economic hardships. It was very easy to scapegoat the Jewish people as causing those economic problems. Conformity to social norms. Again, I think that this one is fairly obvious. If there's a group that doesn't conform to social norms, or an individual that doesn't conform to what we perceive to be a social norm, it's very easy to start becoming prejudiced against that person or that group. Again, a lot of prejudice comes out of our desire for control and our desire to be better than. So when we start to do something like fat shame, somebody is overweight, they don't conform to the social norm of what a good weight should be, then all of a sudden we might start fat shaming them. It gives us a sense of power. Again, when I say us, human beings, it gives human beings a sense of power when we start to do something like this. And it helps us to feel more a part of a larger group that knows what the social norms are. Okay? You can see the other two examples down there. And then media stereotypes, of course, oftentimes begin or reinforce social norms. So what somebody should look like, what the ideal body image is. Mr. Woodard was talking about internet sites and internet news sites as far as the social norms that people should obey if they're conservative or liberal. So media will oftentimes reinforce stereotypes, which in turn can easily cause prejudice. Not going to do that one right now. I think we're going to save that one towards the end of the unit. So then the question becomes, how do we combat prejudice? Well, research has certainly shown that there are definite ways to combat prejudice. Number one is new role models. This actually goes back to the Ash and Milgram experiments. If you remember, if you put one person in the room that dissents from the rest of the group, as in the Ash experiment, or dissents from shocking the learner, as in the Milgram experiment, then the subject will follow suit. The subject will more easily go against the group and follow the new role model. So new role models can actually help combat prejudice, because we see people that aren't following a prejudicial attitude, and we will have a tendency to feel more emboldened to follow them. Equal status contact. That's when you put people from differing groups together in order to either live or participate in a superordinate goal, which comes up here in a second. Yep, right there. So again, a good example would be an athletic team that wants to go out and win the championship. Well, it doesn't matter if you're black or white or brown. Doesn't matter what religion you are. You put them all together, it's equal status. Now you're all playing for the same superordinate goal, and you all are on an equal status as far as being on that team. Interesting study was done that put a group, and I think it was in the 70s, I can't remember exactly, but they put they had a big housing development, and they put both whites and blacks in this housing development in a pretty racially segregated area. But they brought these groups together in a housing development, and they found that prejudice went down pretty dramatically because everybody was on equal status. They were all living in the same area. They had the same type of housing, and so that brought people together. And you can actually legislate prejudice, kind of. So Mr. Woodard talked about the idea that you can't legislate or you can legislate discrimination, can't really legislate prejudice because prejudice is a belief. Well, the trick is, if you legislate discrimination, you can actually affect people's prejudicial attitudes. So, for instance, if you were to legislate that you have to have equal employment opportunities, and a region had not had those equal employment opportunities, so you could, if it was legal to discriminate, I'm not going to hire you because I don't hire African Americans. And then all of a sudden new laws start to be enforced and say, no, there's equal opportunity. You have to hire whomever is capable of that job. Then after a period of time, that will become more of the norm. That discrimination will have gone away because the legislation has created a system where you can't have that behavior of discrimination. And so prejudicial views actually start to dissipate as well. We've seen this not only in our history with African Americans, but also with gender stereotypes and gender prejudices as well, with females in particular in the workforce. Okay, the just world hypothesis. We're kind of moving away from prejudice and discrimination, but the just world hypothesis can kind of explain some prejudicial views. The just world hypothesis is simply the belief that actions always bring fair consequences. Basically, it's a you get what you deserve type of situation. Okay. Now, I'll throw these up there, not the just world scale. We're not going to do that one. So the belief is, and it's not always extreme. It's not always this clear cut, which you'll see on the next slide. But the idea is that noble actions are rewarded and evil actions are punished. That consequences are the result of a universal power that restores moral balance. You can call that God, you can call that nature, whatever it might be. There's something out there that creates a balance in the world. That's the just world hypothesis belief. So there's actually a just world scale, and the higher you are on that scale, the more favorable attitudes might be towards government entities. Why? Because you trust that those government entities are actually creating a system of balance. Okay? You might believe more in others' sincerity, in God, and an internal locus of control. I can control my fate. Why? Because there's balance in the world. So if I'm good and I'm feeding into that balance, then good things will happen to me. This is a powerful one, I think, in today's world with COVID. You might believe that illness is a result of not taking care of yourself. Now, that's obviously not a widespread belief that somebody that catches COVID is just not because they didn't take care of themselves. However, we have heard stories where people will say, well, he was a smoker, so he caught COVID, but because he smoked, he kind of deserved what he got. No. It's easy to do that for some people. Why? Because it gives us a sense of control. All of a sudden, well, I'm not a smoker, so I'm going to be okay on this one. It helps us to feel like we're more in a sense of control. All right, I've already talked for 9 minutes. You can see the last couple of things there, and then I'll be quiet and move on, and maybe Mr. Woodard will come back to the just world hypothesis as he starts his next